with the Hartford Foundation. Sorry about that. I just had a little technical glitch. Good morning, everyone. I'm Mayor Schulman with the Hartford Foundation's Nonprofit Support Program, and I want to welcome you all to today's session on legal issues with managing a remote workforce. The Hartford Foundation is co-sponsoring today's session along with the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven. So I'd like to thank Jackie Downing at the foundation, and I'd also like to welcome all of you who are representing both the Hartford and the New Haven regions. So this is a huge topic to cover in just 90 minutes. So at times it may feel like a whirlwind tour, and it will really be more like a 101 overview of the topic without really having time to drill down deeply in any particular area. So just fasten your seatbelts and we'll get through it together. So those of you who run Zoom workshops know that they are a team sport. So special thanks as always to my NSP colleagues, Betsy Johnson and Monica Kelly, for all of their behind the scenes help and great teamwork in planning for and managing today's session. So I have just a few housekeeping items before we begin the session this morning. First of all, we will be sharing the session recording as well as the slides with all of you following the session. Betsy will be posting the survey for the session in the chat towards the end, and you'll also receive it by email. It's the only price of admission. We really value your feedback and take your comments seriously, so please do just take a few minutes and fill it out. You'll see in the survey that there's going to be one question related to the small breakout group discussions that we're going to have during today's session. So we'll be going into the breakout groups, and when we come out, we really won't have time to debrief the breakout discussions. So one of the questions on the survey is, what were the key takeaways from your breakout discussions? So please jot those down, put them in the survey, and then we're going to share those around with everyone afterwards. If you have questions as we go through the program, please post the questions in the chat, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. Our presenter will also be sticking around for about 15 minutes immediately following the session for what we call after class time. So if there are questions we can't get to during the session, you'll have another opportunity for that 15 minutes after the session is over. We are offering today's workshop in partnership with the Pro Bono Partnership, which many of you know is a nonprofit that offers free non-litigation legal services to nonprofits. And I'd like to thank Priya Morgenstern, who's the director of the Hartford office of Pro Bono Partnership, for her collaboration in bringing this workshop to you. Many of you already know and love Priya, and know how much passion and heart she brings to her work working with nonprofits. So I'll now turn the session over to Priya, who will introduce our presenter for today, Sami Assad, who is generously donating his time to present the session for us. So big thank you to Sami. Priya, it's all yours.
Thanks, Mayor. Good morning to everybody. I want to start by thanking Mayor and the entire team at the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving for their support of these kinds of webinars and for their support of the entire community. As Mayor said, my name is Priya Morgenstern and I direct the Connecticut program of the Pro Bono Partnership. And I will be introducing Sami Assad in more detail a little bit later in a few minutes, but just a few words about the Pro Bono Partnership for those of you on the call that aren't familiar with who we are and what we do. We are essentially a public interest pro bono law firm where all of our clients are nonprofit organizations, and we provide a wide array of non-litigation legal services to a wide variety of nonprofit organizations. More details about whom we serve and what kind of work we do is in the slide deck, and you can take a look at that at your leisure. We also offer a wide array of webinars of this kind, and in fact, in the next 8 or 9 weeks, we have 5 more webinars coming up that will cover bylaws, cybersecurity, a variety of HR and employment-related matters, and some others. So please check out our website. You'll see more information about what we do there. We also operate a resource hotline. So for those of you who think you might benefit from pro bono legal services, please check out our website and let us know if we can help you in any way. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Sami Assad. Sami is a partner in the Hartford office of the National Labor and Employment Law firm, Ford Harrison. He serves as chair of the firm's home healthcare practice group, and he's a member of the coronavirus task force at the firm. He represents employers exclusively in labor and employment-related matters and provides strategic guidance on a wide array of legal challenges that face employers, including remote work arrangements, wage and hour compliance, state and local laws and paid leaves, drug testing, and arbitration agreements. He's an experienced speaker and trainer, having presented numerous seminars and webinars to managers and in-house counsel on emerging labor and employment issues and HR best practices. Sammy's also one of us in that he is the chair of the board of Rebuilding Together Hartford, a nonprofit that provides really important life-changing home repair services to homeowners that are low-income homeowners. He's an awesome speaker. We're so grateful to him for his time. And before I hand it over to him, I just want to remind you that if you have questions, please put them into the chat function. I will be monitoring it. And if there's any questions that come up that are timely and of general interest, I'll jump in and ask Sammy to address them. Otherwise, we'll try to address them at the end of the program. And if we don't get to them then, you can send them to me and we'll make sure that they get answered for you. So with that, and many thanks, Sammy, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Priya, and thank you, Mayor. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm going to try somehow to live up to that intro. And I just want to welcome you all and just tell you that it's an honor for me to be able to share what I've learned with you. As Priya mentioned, I am involved in with a particular nonprofit, and it's great to be able to help other nonprofits to help you achieve your mission in these really, really crazy, interesting times that we're living. One housekeeping item that was, I don't think it was mentioned, this is a workshop. It's not just a webinar. So you're not just going to be listening to me. You're going to have a chance to talk to one another. And that, when I've done a program like this before, was regarded as one of the best, one of the highlights of it. So now's your chance to throw on at least a shirt and you know, put a hat on if you've got bedhead or something, because we do want you to turn your camera on at some point when it is time for breakout so that you can see each other and talk to each other. And if you're joined by phone, try to get to a device where you can be by video as well. We don't want anybody in a breakout room with somebody who's just got the TV on in the background or has disappeared into the kitchen. So please prepare yourselves to participate with one another. You will gain a lot of value from that, and it'll be worth your while. All right, let me share my PowerPoint so that we can get things kicked off here. All right, so hopefully everybody's seeing my screen right now. We've got an agenda here, and before I even go through the agenda, let me just mention what the goal of today is. The goal, as Mayor mentioned, is not for you to be, you know, remote work, employment law pros in 90 minutes. The goal here is for you to fill in any gaps in your knowledge as far as what the issues are. Okay, so for instance, you may be aware, okay, well, hey, I got to provide people with equipment, or I have to make sure they have equipment, but you know, have you thought about wage and hour issues? Have you thought about privacy and security? And so this is, you're not going to have a comprehensive list of answers when we're done. You may have some answers, and I hope you will have plenty of answers actually, but my goal is to have you leave with a comprehensive list of issues that you need to make sure you address if remote work is going to be a part of your long-term future at your organizations. And again, just as a reminder, put your questions in chat. Don't unmute yourself and just fire away, because it will be very difficult to have things moving on pace if we do that. Priya will be monitoring questions and curating them, and probably many of you have a lot of the same questions, which is fine. But if we do it that way, things will go pretty smoothly. All righty, so as you can see, here's our agenda. I have put my list of issues into these different categories. We're going to go through all of them, and we're really going to cover the whole thing, really hiring to firing, everything in between, and how to put it all together. And near the end, I will touch on Many workplaces want to have a hybrid model. So we've gotten questions about what about vaccinations and masks and the changing mask mandates and things like that. I'll try to touch on that a little bit, but that really is kind of outside of the scope of this topic, but I will touch on that briefly near the end. All righty, before we get too serious, guys, just remember, people are still screwing this up royally with some hilarious results. If you don't remember this episode, this was not a show. This was real life. That little kitty cat in the corner was actually a lawyer like me who went to law school, has a degree on the wall like I do, and probably has many years experience appearing in court. But when he had to appear in front of a judge virtually, somehow he ended up turning into a kitty cat. So if you're feeling like, man, how will I ever figure this out? Don't feel bad. You're not alone. And you've got to be willing to laugh at yourself in times like this. But we'll get through it. All right, so let's get into our serious discussion here about these topics. So my first category is productivity and performance. Work time versus non-work time. When everybody used to come into the office, you can tell when people were working. They were in the office at their desk. They had like Outlook open and maybe Word or Excel or something like that. And there you go, they were at work. Now that people are home, it's kind of crazy. Is it work? Is it not work? If you take a break and help your kids with their assignment, or patching them up after that little kid looks like he's executing a pro wrestling move there onto the bed. Hopefully he makes it all right. But things are all kind of a jumbled mess, and you may think that the law will give you a pass, but the law is the law, and it does not give you a pass. So it's your job as the employer to sort of figure out work time versus non-work time. And why do you need to figure that out? Well, there's this law that requires you to pay for all hours worked. And so if you don't know what work time is, then you don't know if you're paying properly or not. And it can get really dicey. You can get into trouble. You can have employees who think, they work whenever they feel like working. Maybe when they get up in the morning, they're on their phone while they're still in bed. And, there are some interesting wage and hour laws that can have some very unpleasant results, because the law wasn't designed with remote work in mind. So you have to really, kind of connect the dots. And if you would like help, reach out to Priya, and she can connect you with an employment attorney who can, make that happen for you. And you kind of need, this is the time for creative lawyers to really shine, because it takes a lot of creativity to think outside the box and say, okay, well, how can we satisfy the DOL and, run our operation as a remote operation? The other piece that's really important is, do you know who's exempt and who's non-exempt? Now, if we were still in an office setting, sometimes you can tell just by the setup. Maybe the person who's exempt is sitting in the corner office with all the space, and maybe the person who's non-exempt is sitting in a cubicle. But as you can see with these two pictures that I have on my slide, you can't tell if one of these people is exempt and one is non-exempt, or both are not. They're just people at home on their laptop. And you really have to think about what the legal tests are for exempt. And that could be an entire hour-long program. In a quick nutshell, to be exempt, there's two requirements. You have to meet the salary test, meaning you have to be paid on a salary basis, and you have to have exempt duties. So you either have to be an executive, or you have to meet the test for administrative exemption, which doesn't necessarily mean what you think it means. It doesn't just mean clerical. Administrative means somebody who kind of helps oversee functions for an organization, like an office manager, but not a secretary. So you really have to think through these issues if you haven't in the past. And what's nice about that is if you do qualify somebody as exempt, then you don't have to worry about their hours. Like myself, I'm an exempt employee. My employer doesn't have to keep track of my time, and I work all sorts of hours, mornings, evenings, overtime. I don't punch the clock, and it's just my work time is all over the place, and that's nice for the employer. But you have to meet the legal requirement in order to avail yourself of that. You also have to meet the salary requirement, like I said, which means paying a certain amount every week without deductions. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But these pictures just kind of really illustrate the challenge of getting a handle on work time. And the important thing is you've got to do something about it. You can't just sort of leave it to your employees to figure it out. You've got to give them the guidance. You've got to wrap your own mind around it so that you can address it appropriately. So for non-exempt employees, it's up to the employer to control what time is worked, right? Because if you, and this is the legal jargon, if you suffer or permit an employee to work, then you've got to pay for that time. So we've got a gentleman here who's presumably working on that laptop, but watching TV in the background. Looks like me in my college days. But for an employer, you probably don't want this scenario. So you may want to give a little bit of guidance on, work time, and maybe have a conversation with your employees as to what their work day should look like. And especially if they're caring for loved ones at home or they've got interruptions at home. But you really do want to control the work time. You want to say things like, do not perform any work outside of your scheduled work time, because we want to be fair to you as the employee. We want to pay you for your time. We also want you to be fair to us, and we don't want you working outside of the, what we've budgeted for as your employer. So we want to be fair. It should be fair both ways. Hopefully that makes sense. As a corollary to the idea of, controlling work time, the law requires that you track work time. So, traditionally you would have some sort of timekeeping system, whether it's a time clock or a computer login. And if you have a computer login, the nice thing about that is you can log in from home or from work or from the office. And so hopefully you have some means of tracking work time. You don't have to have a digital tool. You can do it with paper and pen. But as you can imagine, just like life is a lot easier with email instead of paper mail, you probably want to have some sort of electronic tool that helps you make sense of that. And it doesn't have to be fancy. If you don't want to invest in some sort of software that you pay for, there may be free stuff, or heck, you could even have an employee send you an email every day that says, yep, I started work at 8 and I stopped work at 4, and I took a break for half an hour for lunch. It doesn't have to be complicated, but it does have to be tracked. For exempt employees, the key here is, fortunately, for example, you don't have to track the time, but what you have to watch out for is unauthorized deductions. So in my case, right, for me, my employer's happy because I can work 50, 60 hours and they don't have to worry about it. Flip side, if I work 30 hours one week, my employer still has to give me a full week's pay. And that's how salary basis works for exempt employees. Now, there are some legally permissible deductions, like for instance, if you have a PTO policy that says, you get 5 days of PTO, and after you use up your 5 days, if you need more time off, you can have it, but it will be unpaid. In a situation like that, you can have an employee who has used up all their PTO, takes a PTO day during the week, and then you would pay them for 4 days out of 5 instead of having to pay them for an entire week as an exempt employee. So that's an example of an authorized deduction, but you have to have an appropriate policy for you to take advantage of that. And you do have to avoid unauthorized deductions. All right, we've got a poll question for you. So take a look at the question that's on the screen. We're going to have it pop up as an actual poll that we'll ask you to please take so we can report the feedback to everybody live. So as a result of switching to remote work, what changes, if any, have you made to employees' hours or pay. So did you reduce hours or pay? Did you increase hours or pay? Did you switch people who were exempt to non-exempt, which you can do? Did you just keep everything the same? Or did you make no changes at all, but now that you think about it, you're like, maybe I should have made some changes. So where are you on these answers here? I can tell you that so far, kept everything the same is winning. Some people have increased pay. We're going to put it up on the screen in a minute. Just want to give everybody a chance to respond. We've got most of you responding already. Just give you another couple of seconds, and then I'll leave it to, I forgot, is it Monica? There you go. Let's share the results. All right, so there you go. You can see them on your screen. Most people said they kept everything the same. Some said made no changes, but probably should have. Some switched exempt to non-exempt, which you can do. So you can say, okay, look, because this remote thing is kind of crazy and I don't have as much work for you, let's just have you be hourly for a while, and I'm going to plan to give you 30 hours a week or something like that, and just keep track of your time. And if you go more than 30, I'll pay you for it, and if it's less, we'll adjust it accordingly. But it's going to be hourly. You can do that. Yeah, all right. So there you go. Thank you for participating. There, we've got another poll coming up later, and hopefully it's interesting to you to see what folks are doing as well. We're all kind of in the same boat here. All right, let's continue on this work time, non-work time conversation. Really, really important. This is not really a legal issue. This is just an intensely practical issue, and we're about to talk a little bit more in the breakout, which is coming up. So if you don't have clothes on, get some clothes on. Don't end up on YouTube. You want to clarify and communicate performance objectives for your employees and how you will measure productivity. So again, the traditional office model, it kind of functions as a shorthand. It's like, look, you're sitting at your desk, I can see that you're working, so I don't really need to think about measuring productivity and performance. I can just sort of see that you're working, and that's it. When somebody is not in front of you, obviously you can still manage them. You've been doing it now for over a year probably. But you might feel like you haven't been doing it effectively. And I've had many clients say, gosh, when can we just drag our employees back into the office? I just don't feel like they're really getting as much done. Some of our numbers are down. And I push back a little bit and I say, well, how about you try to articulate what it is that you used to see getting done that isn't being done, so we can sort of, clarify what is it that you need to see getting done, because that will be really good for the organization to be able to articulate those things as opposed to simply relying on the fact that, hey, if people are in the office, I'm happy, that means work's getting done. The more you can articulate what the performance objectives are, the better you can measure productivity, whether it's in the office or remote. The more flexibility you can offer employees, which means happier employees, which means better retention, and you can better focus on what it is that you're actually trying to do, as opposed to just managing human beings, physical location, frankly, right? I'm certainly not opposed to working in the office, but you want to take this sort of blessing in disguise to think about what it is that you really need to get done and how best to achieve it. It'll be a huge win for the organization in the long term, whether people are remote or in the office. All right, so on that note, we're going to send you into a breakout in a minute with these questions. Does your organization effectively communicate performance objectives and measure productivity? If so, how? If not, what would be a good first step toward this goal? So if you have found some effective ways to do this, please share them with your fellow nonprofits so that you can kind of help each other. And if you found it to be a struggle, talk about that in the group so that you can communicate with each other and maybe get a little bit of help to take back to your organization. So here's some tips to make this successful. Please do turn your cameras on and unmute yourselves. Take 2 to 3 minutes just for a very quick intro. Say your name, your role at your organization, and what your organization is, and then spend 7 to 8 minutes on the questions. And somebody's got to go first. So please prepare to say, I'll go first when you go into the breakout session. And if you can also just take some notes while you're doing this, so that in the survey that's to follow, you can share what breakthroughs or important takeaways you got out of the breakout session. And those will be provided to everybody so that everybody can benefit. All right, go for it. Okay. All right, welcome back, everybody. I hope that was as beneficial as I was hoping it to be. Again, if you didn't get a chance to jot down a couple of notes from that, if you've gotten some sort of helpful takeaway, please do jot it down real quick, so that, or open up Notepad on your computer and type it in, so that when you get the survey, you can submit that and it can be shared with everyone else. All right, we've got another poll question for you here. Now we're on the topic of productivity and performance. Have you let staff work while sick, whether with COVID-19 or any other illness? Take a couple of seconds to answer that. Your options are yes, it's no big deal. Yes, but I should have made them use PTO instead. Nope, if you're sick, you shouldn't be working, or I have not had to deal with this. So give us your answers. It'll be shared with everybody. As you probably know by now, it's anonymous. No one's going to know that it's you who said what you said. And let's just, all right, a lot of people are responding. Come on, everybody who hasn't. There we go. A couple more to go. All right. So let's take a look. So most of you said, a little more than half, no, if you're sick, you shouldn't be working. Some said, yeah, it's no big deal. Some have said, I did, but I shouldn't have. And a few of you have not had to deal with this. I don't know how, but so it is a question I've gotten a lot. And this is such a great example of one of those things that probably when lockdown happened and everybody suddenly had to work remotely, nobody stopped to think, okay, wait a minute, how do I restructure my PTO policy so that it deals with working from home and needing PTO? But now that you're, a year out, hopefully, if your policy does not address this topic, you should, clarify and say, if you're not feeling well and you're working remotely, if you feel like you can be fully productive, then you can go ahead and work. But if you are feeling ill and not fully productive, use a PTO day. And if you have a hybrid approach where you're going to have some people working remotely, you can put that into your remote work policy, which I'll talk about later. So yeah, this whole topic of absences, leaves, PTO can get really, really thorny with remote work, because usually in the old days, all three of these things meant you go home instead of coming into the office. But if you're already home, what does an absence look like? What does a leave look like? What does PTO usage look like? Do you want to allow, some of you might have policies that always allow PTO to be used in some sort of smaller increment. Now that idea would be something like, if I got to run out to a doctor's appointment, I'm going to use a couple hours PTO and come back. But, if you're working remotely, do you want people to use PTO to go pick their kids up from school and bring them back, and then use PTO again for when they have to take them to dance practice or piano or whatever it is? You want to think about these things. You don't want to leave it open, because if you leave it open, you know what's going to happen. You're going to have super conscientious employees who are just going to, do whatever makes sense, and you're going to have people who potentially abuse the system, or people who mean well but get confused and think that you're taking their PTO away or not letting them use it, and so on. And leaves as well, stuff like FMLA, if you have enough employees, something that you might have to deal with. And you want to think about, how is that going to apply when people are working remotely? Really important to address it. And how are you going to track attendance? and punctuality as well. All right. Surprise, we've got another poll question. Now we're on the topic of connection and culture. So how does your organization handle equipment needed for remote work? Do you provide all the necessary equipment yourself? Do you expect that employees have to have their own equipment if they want to work from home and provide some sort of extra comp to maybe help them upgrade their Wi-Fi or upgrade their computer equipment or buy a dedicated work-related machine? Or do you just say, look, we're a nonprofit, you want to work from home, go ahead, but you've got to have your own equipment. There is no right and wrong on this. It's really just a matter of, how do you handle it? And it'll be interesting to see what the breakout looks like. All right, I think we've got plenty of answers here. All right, so most organizations provide the necessary equipment. Some require employees to do it and pay for it, and some require employees to do it and don't pay for it. Again, it's really not a right or wrong. I just thought it would be beneficial for you to see that different organizations do it differently, and to sort of kind of see where you fall in as compared to some of your peers. Here in Connecticut, you do not have to provide equipment or pay for costs. Some states you do. Now, as a practical matter, I use this funny picture to kind of make my point. If you do provide company equipment, do you want it to end up like this? Right? Do you provide guidance to your employees on how to keep it safe, what they're allowed to do with it? Are they allowed to use it for personal use? Are they allowed to carry it out of the house or out of their designated space or whatever that may be? As I mentioned already, with regard to cost, in general, here in Connecticut, you don't have to pay employees. Now, there is also a general principle that if you require a particular purchase, like if you were to tell your employee you must have the latest version of Microsoft Office, for instance, and that is so expensive, or it's such a big purchase in a particular week that it causes them to fall below minimum wage in that week, that could be a problem. So you can trip some of these laws depending on how high the cost is and when it's born and how it's born. But in some states, for those of you who have operations outside of Connecticut, like Illinois, California, you are actually responsible for the electricity to charge that phone or laptop, the Wi-Fi. Some plaintiffs' lawyers in California have even argued you should be responsible for a portion of the homeowner's insurance because it's covering their workspace. I kid you not. Just be thankful you're on the East Coast and not the West Coast. But safety is an interesting question that I get asked about a lot. Are you responsible for safety, like workplace safety, like OSHA? And the answer is generally no. OSHA, even before COVID, had said employers are not responsible for what goes on in the employee's house. Obviously, there's always going to be some sort of exception. If you're requiring your employee to work with some sort of horribly dangerous machine that they now have to have in their house, well, there's an exception there. But you're not responsible for an ergonomic desk and adequate lighting and carpal tunnel and slip hazards and little babies sitting on tables throwing rice and meat all over the place. So you don't have to worry about that. We'll talk about workers' comp a little bit later, though, because you still do have to have workers' comp, but you are not responsible for safety. And I mentioned that to say this. I've seen remote policies that say, if you want to work remotely, a company representative will go to your house and inspect the premises and make sure that it is safe. Don't do that. You don't need to do that. You're just, creating more liability by going into somebody's private space and looking around and seeing whether maybe they have a poster that they're, pro-communism or pro-Trump or pro-Biden or, an LGBT activist or whatever it is, you don't want to know about their private lives because it can come back to bite, to be later accused of, well, you made that employment decision based on my protected characteristic, and you're not responsible for the workspace that's in their home. So don't say that you want to send pictures of everything and you wanted somebody to go over their house. Not really a best practice, in my opinion. All righty. What about travel? Right? Travel is not a new concept, of course, but remote work can create more travel in many cases because somebody who would normally just come to the office is now permanently remote. And if you want them to come to a meeting site, they now have to travel during work time when they normally didn't have to do that before. So you have to think about safety. We've got a picture here that I selected to kind of illustrate, how you don't want people traveling for you. Not really a good picture for your organization, and not safe, of course. And if somebody is traveling during work time and they get into an accident or something like that, that creates liability for the employer. Also, if they're a non-exempt employee and they're traveling during the workday, that's work time. And as far as expenses go, it's kind of like what I was saying earlier. If the travel expenses cost somebody to go below minimum wage, you might have an issue. But otherwise, you don't actually have to reimburse for mileage. You don't have to reimburse for gas, parking. A lot of organizations, for-profit and not-for-profit, just as a matter of, taking care of employees, will provide for expense reimbursement. So if you don't have a policy on that, you might want to. So just something you have to think about if remote work causes, sort of more travel, or if people are visiting different workspaces. Now, probably the biggest question I get around the topic of connection and culture is really, man, we used to have a wonderful, cohesive team. We used to have fun in the office. People used to bring cakes for birthdays. I used to work at a firm where we always had wine and cheese for somebody's birthday. Water cooler moments, just, passing each other, saying hello, chit-chatting about the weekend, all that fun stuff that creates a particular environment that feels welcoming, that makes you want to get up and go to work. And a lot of people have complained, we've lost that thanks to COVID and remote work. So what do you do about it? How do you build team? Should you maybe have in-person meetings for that purpose? Should you schedule virtual opportunities for that? Can you really have the same culture in a different environment? And really the purpose of bringing this up right now is to actually have another breakout. This is really something where I think you can contribute to each other far more than I can. I can tell you that many different employers have taken different approaches to this. Some have gotten really creative with Zoom meetings. And, I gave you a slide here that kind of shows you what looks like a really fun, zany, wacky Zoom event. But even with something like that, it still lacks that spontaneity of just passing each other at the water cooler or Keurig machine. So we're going to send you into another breakout session. Talk about this. Here's your question. Does your organization have effective means of team building and creating a healthy culture while working remotely? If your answer to that is yes, you can bet whoever's in the breakout with you is going to want to hear about it. And if the answer is no, try to talk to each other about what would be a good first step to creating that. So we're going to send you into a different groups with different people, just so you can have different, more networking opportunities. So go ahead and share ideas, and please do take notes to provide during these surveys. Everybody. All right, welcome back. So we're going to jump right into new topic now, protections and policies. So security and privacy is an important topic for any organization, for-profit, not-for-profit, especially depending on whether you have stuff like protected health information or some sort of member information, participant information. If you serve children, you've got information that you've got to protect. So how do you do that in a remote environment? Hopefully you're not thinking about this for the first time now, because it's been a year already, and banks have struggled with this. Very, very interesting. You would have never thought a bank or credit union would allow people to work from their homes, but even they had to do it. So, and healthcare organizations had to as well. So hopefully you've thought about this, but if you haven't, or if you maybe put a Band-Aid on it, now may be a good time to sort of revisit these issues and think about, what is it that we want to keep confidential and treat as confidential? What are we required to protect by law? And what steps should we be taking for our remote workers so that they can keep our stuff safe while at home? I use this particular image here to sort of illustrate my point. Let's assume the person that's seated in the chair is doing work. It looks like an Outlook calendar or something, and there's a woman kind of looking over his shoulder surfing. There's a new term. And it is that his significant other, family member, visitor? Probably not an employee of your organization, but she's looking at what's on his screen. And is that okay? If it's not, are you telling your employees what to do about that? I like to include in my remote work policies very practical, concrete tips, like when you step away from your laptop, hit Windows and L to lock your screen if you get up to go to the restroom. And don't, if you need to print stuff out, make sure you keep it locked away, things like that. One additional topic: in Connecticut, we've got this Connecticut statute 31-48D that says if an employer, and this is an old statute, not just for remote work, engages in any sort of monitoring of employees other than using your own eyes and ears, you have to let employees know. So if you have cameras in your office, you got to let employees know. If you monitor internet activity, you should be letting employees know. There was a question in the chat about monitoring keystrokes. If you do that, you should let employees know. That the goal of the law is to, I think, have workers know that they're being monitored. And I don't think you have to be super specific. You just have to say something like subject to electronic monitoring, such as monitoring computer usage. Maybe you don't have to say keystroke, but computer use. By the way, I'm not a big fan of the concept of monitoring keystrokes. I just think that if your employees knew that you were doing that, they would feel that they're not being trusted. And somebody who feels like they're not being trusted is probably not going to give you their best work. Just as a kind of practical thing that I've read in books, and I've also seen it in my practice as an employment lawyer when things go sideways. But you can't do that if you want to, but you do need to follow this law. And if you're monitoring logins or calls or anything like that, you can do that. Priya, was that a hand up? Unmute yourself if you need to.
There we go. Somebody asked whether advising employees in the handbook is.
Oh, you keep getting muted. If advising employees in the handbook is sufficient, yeah, I think so. Although it depends on what your goal is. Let's put it that way, right? If your goal is to check the box that you've satisfied your legal obligation, then it should be okay, provided that you can prove that your employees actually saw the handbook, got the handbook. If your goal is to actually put people on notice so that it affects their behavior, you probably know that burying something in the handbook is not going to affect anybody's behavior. It'll allow you to check the box. But if your goal is to alter behavior, you want to do like what many employers do, which is they have a pop-up screen right when you log on. For instance, that says you're about to get on our computer system, Citrix or VPN or whatever it is. This is an employer-controlled space. Don't treat anything that's going on here as private. It's being monitored by our IT people for viruses and threats, and so be advised. And that's kind of like, oh yeah, this is my work computer. Let me not go on Facebook for 3 hours or Instagram or whatever. So again, depends on what your goal is. Do you want to just check the box or do you want to alter behavior? Sometimes you do just want to bury it in the handbook. Sometimes though, you want to kind of hit your employees over the head with it diplomatically, right? You want it to be a win-win. You don't want them to feel like they're under the thumb, but you do want them to know that, hey, this is work and we want to be fair to you. We want you to be fair to us. All righty, insurance. Yes, you still need workers' comp. They're in their homes, but if they're doing work, if they're on the clock, so to speak, if they're on work time, they are working. And if they get injured while on work time, it's workers' comp. So if they start the day at home and then they get in the car and come into the office for a meeting that you've summoned everybody to, that's work time. And if they get hurt, that's workers' comp. Or if they're at home working and they get up and go to the kitchen to make a cup of coffee and, spill boiling hot liquid on themselves, or, my wife broke a dish this morning by accident, and if you cut yourself, that could be workers' comp. If you slip and fall on your way from the bathroom because your kids were in there taking a bath, and splashing water everywhere, and you slip and break a hip, that could be workers' comp. So talk to your broker, make sure you've got everybody classified properly for workers' comp. And I cannot overemphasize, talk to your broker. Your broker can't get you the insurance that they don't know you need. And I have had employers say to me, I don't understand why my carrier is not covering this. And I'm not talking necessarily workers' comp, it could be general liability, for instance. And I'm like, well, did you tell your broker that you have people, juggling torches for an employee retreat? No, I never brought that up. No, and that didn't actually happen. I wish it did though. But you got to have these conversations with your broker. That's their job. They'll get you the insurance you need. But yes, you do need workers' comp for remote employees. All righty, hiring and separation. Interviewing and onboarding. So you've probably done this already over this past year. Most of the stuff that you would do in person can translate just fine virtually. I just hired a new attorney for my office. I interviewed her remotely. No big deal. People are not surprised by that anymore. There are some legal issues though that need to be addressed. The one particular one that I've highlighted for you here is I-9 compliance. Traditionally, USCIS has been notoriously rigid about I-9s. You have to see the documents with your own eyes before signing that, yep, this person is authorized to work in the United States. Thanks to COVID, ICE has relaxed these requirements, but only temporarily. And I am going to put in the chat right now, hopefully I can still paste it. Yep, I just pasted a link that you can keep for yourselves, because you can continue to verify I-9s virtually until the end of the month, which is Monday. And that doesn't mean you can't after Monday. It's just that the guidance that allows you to do it virtually expires on Monday. So the link that I just sent you, you should check that this week, check it on Monday, and USCIS will likely update whether or not they're extending it again, because they did extend it once before. It was supposed to expire in March, March, and they extended it to May. So we'll see. If they don't extend it, then that means you have to go back to verifying I-9s live in order to be compliant with the law. Separation. I have had to counsel clients on this. It really, really sucks to terminate somebody without it being a face-to-face, in-person conversation, especially if it's a termination where, it's a downsizing. It's not really like a performance-based, and you want to be able to say to somebody, look, I'm so sorry, our funding was cut. We lost a donor, or, we just don't have the hours, and we can't justify it for right now, or we have to scale back, whatever it is. And, you don't want to leave a person like this gentleman here on the other end of a screen, sort of with their grief all alone in their house. You want to be there. But unfortunately, thanks to COVID, it was a reality. And if you are going to have remote work going into the future, it's not COVID related, you may want to think about that. Do you want to have an opportunity, some sort of regularly scheduled in-person meetings, so that when a separation is necessary, you can sort of say, hey, tomorrow, can you report to that meeting site, and you can meet with them there and sort of give them the bad news in person. But if you are going to do it, fully remotely, you do want to think about maintaining privacy and sensitivity. Again, you saw some of the pictures that I used in my slideshow. You've got kids running around, you've got significant others. You may even have roommates, right? You don't want to announce somebody's termination in front of others, and you don't want them to maybe get emotional in front of their children when that's not what they would want to do. So you want to think about that very carefully, how to maintain that privacy and sensitivity. And return of property. I am dealing with a client right now who terminated somebody who's just like refusing to return the company laptop and is saying all kinds of crazy stuff. My client sent her a box and a FedEx label, and she's like, oh, this box is not safe. And isn't there a lithium battery in this laptop? I don't think I'm allowed to ship it. And it's like, what the heck are you talking about? But, if you've given employees property, you want to make sure you get it back. So you want to think about that. One way to do that would be that if before you give property, right, proactivity is really, really essential on a lot of the stuff. Before you give property, you have them sign something that says, I hereby agree to return all company property upon separation for any reason, right? And that way you can sort of, at least maybe if they're being stubborn, throw that in their face and say, look, you agreed to do that, and I relied on your agreement to give you this stuff. So you breach a contract. And Connecticut has a handy statute called statutory theft, which says that if somebody steals your stuff, you can sue them and get triple damages. So I'm having to threaten this person with Connecticut statutory theft to try to convince her to just return the dang thing. But yeah, these are issues that happen when you have people working remotely. All right, putting it all together. So you want to have a remote work policy if you don't have a remote work policy. This would be a good poll question. Maybe the next time I do this, I'll ask people, do you have a remote work policy? I wouldn't be surprised if more than half don't, but it is good to have one. You may think, well, I already have an employee handbook, so what's the big deal? Well, your employee handbook doesn't really address everything effectively. It's this concept of, sewing a patch of new cloth onto an old garment, or putting new wine into old wineskins, for those of you who make wine according to ancient biblical tradition. But the idea, though, is that something that you've had forever and ever that applied beautifully in your in-office setting may not apply so well, and just tacking on something may not actually solve it. You may actually need to sort of rethink a lot of your policies comprehensively. We talked about some of those, like PTO, expenses, travel, performance and productivity, attendance, right? All of these things don't apply the same way for those that are working remotely. And don't forget to reinforce existing policies. People may think, well, I'm working remotely, I can send inappropriate pictures from my phone to my fellow worker who's also working remotely. We're not at work. Well, wait a minute. You are at work. You're working, he or she's working. Doing that will violate our anti-harassment policy. So you do want people to be aware of how your policies, against discrimination, harassment, workplace violence, can still happen in a remote setting. People can, threaten one another remotely, and that's a no-no, obviously. So you do want to put all that together. Now, here's where I said I would just address this concept of putting it all together. What if you have a hybrid environment and you have people who are going to, some are in and some are out? How does all of that work? You want to think about that too, because you don't want your handbook to make people who are in the office seem like first-class citizens and people who are working remotely seem like second-class citizens, right? And your employee handbook may unwittingly do that. For instance, if your employee handbook says, everybody gets a snack break, and we have a fully stocked break room with kind bars and K-cups, and okay, well, what about us, uh, poor folks out in the, working remotely? I guess we're not in on that. Well, is there a way to sort of equalize that somehow? Think, it's something you want to think about. Also, people are going to be coming into the office. Do they need to be vaccinated in order to do that? Legally, you can make that a requirement. You can say you must be vaccinated if you want to come into the office. But, and we just don't have enough time to really dig into that. But you have to think about things like accommodation for disability. What if they can't get vaccinated due to a disability or some other condition that's not a disability, but would protect them under OSHA, because they should not have to take a vaccine that threatens their life in order to comply with a company policy that can be accommodated. Or what if they have a religious accommodation request, right? So if you're going to mandate vaccines, you're going to have to take all of that into account and really talk to counsel about that. And what about masks? Is everybody in the office wearing masks? And then somebody who's working remotely going to come in, they need to know that they need to wear masks too. Or are you going to say, according to the governor's guidelines, now you don't have to wear masks if you're vaccinated, and you're going to have to prove that you're vaccinated in order to take advantage of that, unless you have a accommodation need or something like that. Or it can get really, really thorny, and these are things you want to think about. But you do have guidance that is coming out on an ongoing basis from federal and state governments on these topics. So continue to pay attention to those guidelines. And I think I have a slide coming up about it, but I'll just mention it now. My firm's website, especially the coronavirus task force page, has tons of resources that are very, very helpful. So please take a look at that. I think I'll put it up in a little bit. So that's the concept of really have a remote work policy, especially if you're going to have a hybrid setting where some people are going to be eligible for remote work, and what do they have to do to qualify, and what will it be like if they are granted that permanent remote work, and how do your existing handbook policies apply in a remote or hybrid world. Don't forget posters and notices, right? You probably forgot after working remotely for so long, but if you go back into your office and go into your break room, there's probably a big old poster that says, minimum wage and, sexual harassment is against the law, and it has all of these different things. What about remote workers? Well, I actually wrote an article about that back in the end of 2020. You can take a look at it on my website. Again, you can go to the coronavirus page. But the DOL has given out guidance on that. And one of the ways you can satisfy your posters obligation is to have your posters, in a PDF or some format available on some sort of company intranet, or, on a web page on your internet that only employees can access, or that's kind of hidden, but people can just click on it and see it. But you do want to make sure that you give that access. So maybe you have it on the intranet, and then you send an email to everybody that says, hey, everybody, if you're working remotely, we updated our internal page to now include all of those, postings that we normally have in the break room. Or you can put in your employee handbook or remote work policy that says all of our, required postings and notices are available at, and put in the address or how to reach it. That's an important point. So let me actually just ask Priya, would you mind just going on my firm's web page and just put in if you just Google Ford Harrison coronavirus and get the link and put it in the chat for everybody to have. That way they can go there if they'd like. And you can go on my profile, my bio, and there's always going to be a link that if you subscribe, you can put your email address and you can get. I'll warn you, you'll be flooded with alerts and news from around the country about what's going on. So that is
Okay.
that's it. So we've got time for questions.
Hey, Priya, I can post the link of the COVID resources in the chat if you want to do the
I was just
questions.
going to ask you to do that because my laptop is going.
Oh, okay, sure.
I got it covered.
Thank you. Thank you.
So if you have any question, I can take them now.
All right, so there was one, can you hear me? I'm off mute,
Yeah.
okay.
Mhm.
There was one question, Sammy, from somebody who was asking if ICE doesn't extend the I-9 permission to do virtual evaluation of documents and it has to be done in person, but they still are working all remotely. What's your suggestion as to how to proceed with that?
So I have to go back to that disclaimer about I'm not your lawyer.
Right.
For this one, because it is a bit of a thorny issue. I will just tell you that the law is you have to get it done within 3 days of when they start working for you. Now, I know that, the law allows the employer to designate some designee to do the verification, meaning it doesn't have to be the person's supervisor, it doesn't have to be HR. It really can be any human being, as long as the employer designates that human being. So maybe you have an agent, maybe you use a service that will go out and look at the docs, and then they're sort of deputized by the employer to check the documents and sign the authorization saying, yep, I have verified these myself. So that's what the law says. I mean, I can tell you just as a practical matter, a lot of people just wait until they can do it whenever they can do it. So yeah, it's
okay.
one of those thorny issues.
Okay.
Yep.
Anybody else? Let me see. All
Priya,
right.
I think there had been a question earlier. I'm not sure if Sammy had covered it about, can we reject a candidate if they say they won't get the vaccine? And then how do vaccines work in a remote setting?
Okay, so since we have time, I can say a little bit more about that. Can you reject an employee who doesn't want to take the vaccine? The answer is going to be something like yes, unless they have a, well, so let's go like this. First of all, if the employee has an ADA covered or an OSHA covered or a Title VII covered basis to not get the vaccine, right? So ADA, I have a disability. OSHA, there are facts that suggest that I will have a very dangerous reaction if I take this thing. Or Title VII, right? It's against my religion. If the employee has one of these three things, then you have to think about, can I accommodate those things? Meaning, can I let them work remotely, or can I let them wear a mask the whole time, or maintain, work in a space that they won't be interacting with other people. And if you can't, then you really have to be prepared to say, I can't accommodate that requirement. It would pose an undue hardship for me. Therefore, I'm turning you down. And you can probably still prepare for litigation, because unless you, and obviously I'm going to tell you, you got to talk to counsel. Do not turn somebody down for not taking the vaccine without talking to a lawyer. That's really the best answer I can give you on that. But yeah, it's theoretically possible. I will tell you that in my experience, I've never had it come up. I have yet to see an employer, and I've got, and my firm does work for airlines, hospitality, tons of healthcare. I do a lot of work for healthcare, and we have yet to have an employer who says, yeah, I'm firing people who are not going to get the vaccine, or I'm putting it right on my job posting, don't apply if you're not going to get the vaccine. I have yet to see it, and that's because the FDA has only authorized it on an emergency basis. So a lot of the healthcare organizations feel it would be, frankly, a bit unethical for them to mandate something that hasn't been, truly 100% cleared. And also, it's just such a morale hit to tell somebody that, you've been a valuable employee for this long, but, and if you're not going to get this vaccine, you're out. So they're just not doing it. So I'm just relating that to you anecdotally, for what it's worth. But yeah, you really want to think about that and talk to counsel before you just say, vaccine or out.
Right. Okay.
It's
And
legally doable, but yeah.
Another related vaccine questions, and just heads up to everybody, the questions about mandating vaccine and for whom you can mandate them and whatever, these are very complicated, very nuanced questions. Sammy can't give legal advice to all of us, so we can only really address them very, very briefly, but Pro Bono Partnership has a lot of resources. We're working on follow-up programs. Guidance is changing every day. So please be patient with us. But that said, here's a question. Can you mandate vaccines for new hires, but not current staff? Not sure why you would do that, but Sammy, take it away.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I definitely wouldn't do that. Because remember, anytime you make a distinction between one group and another group, you're opening yourself up to somebody saying, that distinction is really about race or about ethnicity or sexual orientation or gender or whatever. Because, if your current staff is all female and you've got a male new hire and you're like, you have to get vaccinated, and my all female staff does not, I mean, you just set yourself up with nothing else. You just set yourself up for a gender discrimination claim, and then you're going to be on the defense, and just not a great. And then if that person does get hired and they find out that you impose something on them that you didn't impose on the others, there's just none. You'd have a tough time justifying why one category has to and the other does not.
Right, and what are you achieving anyway if the goal is safety in the workplace?
Right.
Anyway, another question is, can you ask non-exempt, this goes back to wage hour stuff. Can you ask non-exempt employees to sign an agreement that states they will not work beyond standard work hours at home unless required or requested to do so?
So, usually, right, an employer will put into the handbook, don't work off the clock, don't falsify records, don't work unauthorized overtime. These are like just plain vanilla wage and hour policies for non-exempt. For in the remote setting, having an agreement is an interesting concept. I would warn you about using agreements because normally employment is at will, or at least that's what every employer I've ever dealt with wants it to be. Mm-hmm. And so as soon as you introduce an agreement, you have to be careful that that agreement does not undermine at-will employment, right? So anytime I have an agreement for at-will employees, I make sure it says, nothing in this document changes the voluntary nature of employment. I don't like to use at-will. I like to speak in plain English. The voluntary nature of employment. Employment with the organization is always voluntary. You can leave at any time. We can let you go at any time. So that's an important point. The use of an agreement, it's kind of like what I said before about burying something in the handbook or putting something in front of people's faces. An agreement is a great way of highlighting something and saying, hey, listen, I really, really, really want to make sure you understand this. And I don't like the word agreement unless I am really trying to have I'm giving you X and you're giving me Y. What I would suggest as a practical point would be an acknowledgement, right? I acknowledge that I'm only allowed to work when I've logged on to the system and I'm reporting my time, and I acknowledge that I will not work off the clock and that the company doesn't want me to do that, and so on and so forth. That will be helpful if that employee later says, oh man, I worked tons of hours and I never got paid for them. I will also tell you this, no amount of paperwork will trump practice, right? So if you have a policy that says don't do it, you have an acknowledgement that says don't do it, but you have a supervisor who says, hey, listen, I really, really need to get this project done. I need this grant finished. The deadline's today. If we don't get it finished, we're going to miss out on this opportunity. Please, please, please. But I don't have any more money in the budget for overtime. Can you just please get it done? I'll take care of you later. What's that employee going to do? No, I can't because I signed an acknowledgement that says, I won't do that. No, the employee is going to say, sure, whatever you say, boss, and get it done. And so you want to make sure that, your managers don't undermine your own policies and practices, and because that's usually what it looks like in litigation. It looks like my supervisor told me to do this, and so me coming back and saying, yeah, but the policy says not to, it's just, the supervisor telling me to do it's going to be the policy or acknowledgement or even agreement. So yeah, keep that in mind.
Thank you. Another question, Sammy. When performance-based issues during remote work rise to the level of termination, and there is adequate documentation of poor performance, are there any legal considerations due to COVID of which we should be aware?
I'm not really sure I understand that fully. There's nothing specific to COVID that should prevent you from letting somebody go. That said, I've seen people use COVID as like, I don't know, just a word to throw into just kind of every conceivable scenario there is.
Like HIPAA, everything is due to HIPAA. Yeah.
Yeah. You do want to think, well, can my employer accuse me of terminating them due to something illegal? And maybe what the questioner is getting at is, maybe the employee is going to say, look, my performance was great until this whole stupid remote work thing happened. And my employer never gave me the support I needed. I was forced to rely on crappy internet. I was forced to rely on my own tech, which wasn't up to snuff. And yet they expected me to produce just like I would have in the office. You can still expect what you want to expect as an employer. You do want to be fair. And that's really kind of all I can say, given the vague nature of the question and all that. You just want to.
I'll add just how important it is to make sure that the file of whatever employee or employees you're having issues with, make sure the file reflects whatever challenges or concerns you have, because more often than not, we see our clients coming to us where there's been problems over months or even sometimes years, but the employee's file doesn't reflect them because there hasn't been stuff in writing. And that's more often than not the Achilles heel, not COVID. So that's what I would urge everybody to pay attention to. Let's see if we have anything else here. All right, here we go. What might we do about an employee who's requesting 2 extra weeks of unpaid vacation? She earns 3 weeks paid, wants 2 weeks unpaid. And this person does not want to identify the agency.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's a COVID related question or not, but it's just, there we go.
You say no.
Just say no.
Provided that's what you normally tell everybody else who asks, right? I mean, the vacation, whether it's New Jersey or Connecticut, there is no legal requirement to give vacation. So it's whatever your policy says. If your policy says you get 3 weeks, then you can stick to that. And if they want more, I mean, I will just say that COVID has caused people to be more flexible in a number of ways. And one of the potential pitfalls of too much flexibility is, if you did it for Frank, you got to do it for, Sophia. And if you did it for, Jim, who's Caucasian, you got to do it for Steve, who's African-American. You can't, you have to think about what precedent you've set. So if you've allowed people who used up their company, provided vacation, you've allowed them to take an extra unpaid vacation, then you have to think about, well, how can I say no to this person? Or can I put out a new policy effective immediately that, hey, all this flexibility with vacation, it stops now, going forward, you get what you get and that's it. We're not going to make exceptions. Again, you want to think about that too and the impact that it can have. So it's really a, what precedent have you set rather than are you in violation of the vacation law, because there is no vacation law.
Okay. I don't have any other questions here in the chat. Last call for questions, anybody?
A lightning round. No, it depends. No, I don't like to say it depends, but yeah, if anybody has any questions, feel free to.
You can reach out to me afterwards or to Sammy. You have our contact information. So I guess we can wrap up, and I do want to remind everybody to respond to the survey for the Hartford Foundation. And please do include your notes or comments from the breakout session, any aha moments, any thoughts you want to share. I want to thank my colleague, Christine Duffy, who is in our New Jersey office. She's my fellow program director, who is herself quite an expert on HR law. And she's been chiming in all along, so I'm grateful for that. And I want to thank the team at the Hartford Foundation, and most importantly, thank Sammy for his excellent presentation, his time. And I'll hand it over to Mayor in case she has any wrap-up words. Thanks
I think you covered it, Priya. Just big thank you to Priya and to Sammy for spending all this time with nonprofits. I think this information is so important. Thank you all for being here. And again, if you have additional questions, you can always reach out to Priya. So thank you again, Priya and Sammy.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.